Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I wanted to share with you a review of the new Urban Decay Naked Reloaded palette. I'm also going to be comparing it to the Anastasia Sultry palette. I'll give you guys some swatch comparisons and let you know the differences between both palettes. So if you guys want to know everything about the new Urban Decay Naked Reloaded palette, then just keep on watching. Alright, so I ended up purchasing the palette online at the Urban Decay website, and then it is available now at Sephora as well, at Sephora.com, and then in stores it's going to be available on March 7th. And then actually after I already purchased the palette, Urban Decay ended up sending me the palette as PR. So I'm actually going to do a giveaway with this palette in this video. So the giveaway will be through my blog. So I'll have a link to a blog post giving this palette away in my description box. So if you guys are interested in winning this palette, just head over to my blog to enter to win. And it also comes with this primer potion. I'm just gonna go ahead and like give away the actual PR package since it is like really cute. So you guys will end up getting this little package. It came with this like sleeve too. It says unmute your neutral, and then the palette is inside. So if you guys want to win the palette and then also a full-size primer potion, just head to the link below and you guys will be entered to win. It'll be open for a couple weeks, but all the details will be in that blog post. And then the price of the palette is $44. This has 12 shades, 6 mattes and 6 shimmer or glitter shades. They're all pretty neutral colors. Well, they're all neutral completely shades, and a couple different finishes. And then the outer shades are a little bit bigger, these two pans, and then also retro and barely baked are slightly bigger than the rest of the shades. So those are the shades you would normally use the most anyways, so they're slightly bigger. And then of course it also has a mirror up top. And then the coolest thing about this whole palette is it's like a cushion packaging. You would have to like touch it in person to probably like see it, because I did not know that seeing it in pictures. So I definitely do love the packaging of this palette. I think it's really innovative because I don't have any palettes that have like a cushion texture to them. It's like very sleek as well. And then I'm gonna go ahead and insert swatches of all 12 shades. They all swatch pretty similarly. The one shade that would be a little bit different is the shade Angel Fire. It's the one that's on my lid today. It looks pretty, but then when you actually go ahead and swatch it out, because it has more of a glitter finish to it, it's gonna kind of disappear. So you definitely need to use that shade with like primer potion or wetting your brush or some kind of base. And then generally with most of the shades, they kind of lean a bit lighter. A lot of the transition shades are definitely lighter in this palette, and that's what I've struggled with a little bit, because there's not enough transition shades or variety between the transition shades to really get more into complicated looks. I find that really you just have a matte dark brown, and then the rest of the transition shades are a lot lighter. So I definitely wish that there was some shades in between. So I'm gonna go ahead and swatch some comparisons between the Reloaded palette and the Anastasia Sultry palette, and then I'll zoom you guys in too so you can get a closer look of both palettes. All right, so here is a closer look at both palettes, and even just like the packaging too. They are ridiculously similar, and even when I first saw spoilers of the Urban Decay palette, I knew I wanted to compare it to the Sultry palette. I knew that it was super similar, but seeing it in person, they're so similar. And really the differences between both palettes are gonna be more of the standout shimmer shades in the Anastasia palette, like the silver shade, and then some of like the olive shades, and yeah, basically most of the shimmers are the standout differences between both. And then here are all of the side-by-side comparisons. So there are 7 pretty similar shades between both palettes, and considering the Urban Decay palette only has 12 shades, that's a whole lot of the palette that is very, very similar to the Sultry palette. So starting off, this side is the Urban Decay side, this side is the Anastasia side. So we have the shade Bribe and Fresh, then Angel Fire and Pearl. Then we have Retro and Bloom, the 2 dark cool tone shades Endgame and Dystopian, Distilled and Teak, the matte shades Bucked and Birch, and then Reputation and Rose Quartz. So those are all really similar, like very faint differences between the shades of both palettes. And then some of the colors you aren't gonna find in the Reloaded palette are basically the shades that are my favorite in the Sultry palette, are the shades that I wear a ton, like Cyborg. This is such a beautiful shade. And seeing the Reloaded palette like in pictures, I really thought that this shade Dreamweaver was gonna be very similar, but they're not at all. Like the lighter shade is the Anastasia shade. They're very different shades for sure. And then some of the other shades that I love in the Anastasia palette, this is the shade Steampunk, which is a gorgeous bronzy color. And then also Ember. This is like an olive neutral color. Those are some of my favorite shades in the Anastasia palette, and those aren't shades that are also in the Reloaded palette. And then you also get some more variety in transition shades in the Anastasia palette, because we have a black, a gray shade, and then a cool tone brown shade. And then in the Reloaded palette, there's a lot of overlap with the transition shades. Like this shade Blur is so subtle. It doesn't look that much different than Bribe. It's a little bit darker, but it's still like just as subtle. And then these two medium tone brown shades are gonna look super similar. And then you do have like the reddish tone and then the dark brown, but basically like the matte shades in here, there's kind of some overlap in there. So there's not as much variety, even though there's just as many matte shades in both palettes. All right, so those are all of the similarities between both palettes. I'm gonna move into the tutorial so you guys can see how I did my eye makeup today using the Naked Reloaded palette. All right, so to start off, I'm gonna take the shade Bribe, which is this like eggshell color, and it has a little bit of a sheen to it. So it's like a good shade for your brow bone to do a little highlight, but it mostly looks matte. And I'm using the shade Boundaries, which is a warm medium tone brown shade. And all of the matte shadows, they do have a decent amount of fallout because they are pretty powdery. I'm also taking the shade Bucked, and this is more of a cool tone medium brown. It's actually not any darker than Boundary. They're both kind of like just as dark, but I just want to add the cool tone shade to just give a little bit more dimension in my crease, kind of like contour out my crease slightly. Next up, I'm going in with a little bit of the shade Endgame. I don't want to apply too much because it is a really dark cool tone brown. I just want to add a little bit of depth in my outer corner. Then for my lid, I'm going to take the shade Angel Fire. This is a really, really pretty shade, but you definitely need to use it wet or with some glitter glue. It actually does apply nicely just with a wet brush. So my brush is wet, and it's like a very foiled shade, but it also has like kind of chunks of glitter. So if you don't apply it wet, it's not even going to stick onto your lid. I definitely wish that there was one more brown shade in this palette. This is an all brown palette, but I wish there was something else matte in between these shades and this dark brown, because I don't want to add this like into my outer corner too much, because I don't want it to get like super dark, and then the light shades don't really give it that intensity. So I really wish there was something in between, and that's what I found with like a couple different eye looks that I've done with this palette, that there's just like a deeper or in the middle transition shade just missing to make looks a little bit deeper and a little bit darker too. I'm gonna add just the tiniest bit of the dark brown, just with cool tone browns. I don't like them. I feel like they can get kind of muddy pretty quickly, so I don't want to add more than what I just did. All right, so I'm pretty much done. I'm just gonna add some brown eyeliner, and then I'm gonna apply the shade Distilled all over my lower lash line. I definitely prefer like a shimmery brown on my lower lash line and not anything matte or too harsh. All right, so my eyes are pretty much done. I feel like my makeup looks so soft. I like it, but normally when I do lighter lid colors, I try to like make it really deep or more dramatic in my crease or outer corner, but there's just not the shades that I would normally use to do that without making it look like too cool tone or too muddy. So I didn't want to go in with like this shade anymore. And then these deeper shades are kind of cool tone too. I mean, I did use a little bit of this shade, and these two shimmer shadows They are a little bit more difficult to work with because they're a little bit drier. So like when I swatch it, you can see, well, the dark brown that I used in my outer corner is a bit better, but the like more gray tone is a lot more dry. So it's not like you can get a lot of pigmentation or like a really foiled or wet look with those shadows. So really the lighter shades are the ones that are going to give you the most pigmentation. Like these shimmers are really pretty. All these lighter tones. So those are some of the other shades that I didn't use in my makeup today, but those work really nicely as well. All right, so I am gonna apply some lashes. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that, and then I'll give you guys all of my final thoughts about the palette. All right, so this is the final look with the Reloaded palette. And basically every time I've used this palette, I end up liking my makeup, but it's a lot softer than I normally do my makeup when I'm doing like a full face of makeup. But when it comes to like full makeup looks, I tend to do way more dramatic makeup, even if it's neutral. But with this palette, like I said in the tutorial, they are missing some more transition shades to really kind of make more dramatic looks. I always feel like my makeup ends up looking pretty similar in tones. Any crease color that I use or any lid color that I use, even with these lid colors, like they're so pretty and they apply really pretty, but you're not gonna get like a smokier eye look with this palette unless you're really packing on this dark brown shade, and I just don't like cool tone browns. I always feel like my makeup's gonna get muddy really quickly every time I apply a cool tone brown. So it doesn't give you a lot of wiggle room to work with. And then these two deeper shades are not as pigmented as the rest of the shimmer shades in this palette. So you really do need to pack these on a lot if you do want to apply those as an outer corner shade or even apply them on your lid. So even though it is darker, it's still going to show up more subtle because they are drier than the lighter tones in this palette. So that's how I feel about the color scheme. It's definitely more of like daytime looks, less dramatic, less deeper looks. I feel like this is like the work appropriate version of this, because with this palette you're gonna get a lot more foiled shades, you're gonna get deeper looks, smokier looks for sure. But if you don't like to wear like that dramatic of eyeshadows and you like these tones, then definitely go with the Reloaded palette, because you can basically create the same looks but like toned down for like everyday looks and just more natural looking makeup looks. All right guys, so that's gonna be everything for this comparison between both palettes. Definitely the Sultry palette is absolutely amazing. That's one of my holy grail palettes. If you're debating between both, I would definitely recommend that one. But if you find that one like too dramatic for how you normally do your makeup, then maybe pick up the Reloaded palette. And even if you're like watching Sultry palette tutorials, you can basically recreate it with the Reloaded palette if you want looks that are a little bit more maybe wearable or like work appropriate or daytime appropriate, or just more natural looking compared to the Sultry palette. So that would be like the best way to differentiate between both. But if you're like me and you love like very metallic eyes, go for the Sultry palette, because I don't think that anything can beat the formula of Anastasia palette. And then also, if you are interested in the Naked Reloaded palette, you can enter to win one down below. In my blog post, a link to it will just be in the description box. And then in the blog post, I'll also have all of the giveaway rules and details, how long it lasts for, and everything like that. But that's all for today's video. If you guys liked it, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And I'll talk to you guys soon in my next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.